What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Subjectively Correct podcast, a movie podcast where two buddies discuss a couple of films that they've selected for each other based on a theme for the episode. I'm joined, as always, by my good buddy Matt.
Good day.
And this week, month's episodes, whatever, I always fumble the frequency.
This time.
This time, our theme is loss, which I think is quite a broad kind of subject and less about filmmaking and more about storytelling, I think, which is kind of interesting to me this time.
Right. Yeah. A very happy-go-lucky theme this time. We're going to have a great time.
Yeah. I have not been rubbing my eyes the last few hours after watching a film ready for today, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
I do want to just say, because storytelling about loss can be quite, it's quite, the craftsmanship behind it, I think, is quite deliberate, and the way stories are told in that sense to elicit certain emotions and information and that kind of thing is quite deliberate. More than usual, I will say to anyone listening to this, if you're interested in watching these films that we've selected for today, I would definitely recommend watching them before we talk about them, because we will talk about spoilers. We will talk about things that perhaps it's not worth, but might kill it a little if you hear about it first before watching said film. So I believe that for every film that we talk about, but I think this week or month, fucking episode, this time it's like more relevant than ever.
Yeah, I agree.
Because especially the film that you brought, Matt, I was watching it and there are some key parts in it where I was like, man, I'm glad I didn't know about this beforehand.
Ain't that the truth, brother? Yeah. Fuck.
So yeah, I just wanted to get that out of the way at the beginning. But yeah, Matt, take it away. Tell us about the loss-filled documentary that you made me watch this episode.
This gosh damn film. Talking about this one might be a bit rough, but it is very genuinely one that I think is worth talking about. This is a film that I've also almost picked for previous themes, but then didn't have the balls to do it. So finally doing it now, despite all the worries and fears or whatever. So my pick for this time is a film called Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father, released in 2008. A documentary directed by a man called Kurt Könne, who is basically the entire mastermind behind this project. He wrote, he edited, he composed the score even. It's a full-on, I don't want to say one-man project because this is very much a film about community and people, but it is very much spearheaded by this one person. Because the subject of this unfortunate true crime documentary is Andrew Baxby, who was, and we're getting straight up into the heavy themes here, so genuinely warning, I don't know, whatever, trigger warning or whatever, because this is genuinely heavy subjects and graphic to a degree, so be prepared for all of that. Yeah. This movie is about the unfortunate subject of Andrew Baxby, who was murdered by his ex-partner after the breakup, by Shirley Jane Turner is the murderer's name. To make matters more complicated, she was pregnant with his son at the time, and the film largely focuses for a while on the attempts of Andrew Baxby's own parents trying to gain custody of this child to make sure it is growing up in a safe environment and not in the hands of this convicted murderer. Unfortunately, the justice system is throwing a lot of stones in their way, and it's not going as smoothly as anybody would want to. The film is made because Kurt Könne, the director and whatever, everything, was a very close friend of this Andrew Baxby. They grew up together, and they both grew up making a lot of movies together as like hobbyist filmmakers. Andrew Baxby has stood in front of the camera for Kurt Könne plenty of times as they grew up together. And in a sense, this film is, as Kurt Kurner says himself, the last movie they made together. And it is supposed to serve as a visual memento of this person that was beloved by plenty of friends and family, and as a visual memento to later show Zachary, the son that is in the middle of this entire unfortunate story. Again, we already warned that we are gonna be going into spoiler territory. Again, it is very much recommended that you watch this movie beforehand, because I'm gonna reveal one of the major developments in the story, which is one of the major parts why this film is honestly widely regarded as one of the most hard to watch films or whatever. Because as things get more complicated, as we watch the fight for custody of this child, and how the parents have to negotiate and talk with this convicted murderer to have their time with the child, things again don't go the way it should, and eventually the kid is as well murdered in a murder-suicide by done by Shirley Jane Turner. So there is the big fuck off moment where already a dire situation gets even worse, and it is not a good time to watch. It is a very, very difficult thing. Even as somebody who's not involved at all, even just watching this movie, it's a very difficult thing to see these people go through. And here's the thing with this movie. I believe a lot of true crime documentaries just go the lazy route of generally exploiting a horrible story and sensationalizing it and making it part of some distasteful piece of entertainment. If you're in that mindset, you could be very cynical and say this movie does something similar. If you don't, I'd argue if you haven't seen this movie, you could think this might go the same path. But I'm convinced Dear Zachary is one of those films that does not do that. Dear Zachary is not about the tragedy that is unfortunately at the core of this film. Dear Zachary is much more about the people that come together after or during this tragedy, and how they eventually learn to go on from there in somewhat of a healthy manner. And honestly, rewatching this film reminded me a little bit of another documentary that we have watched on this podcast for the documentary episode a while back, where I brought Casting John Benet, which was essentially also a true crime documentary with a real murder case in the center. But that as well was more so about the people, about how we as humans talk about a tragedy like that, how we process something like that and go on from something like that. And Dear Zachary is kind of like in the same vein, although the subjects, the people involved, are much closer to the actual tragedy. And I believe that this film, as unfortunate as it is that it exists, as unfortunate that there was a reason for this film to be made, I believe this film is genuinely a peak showcase of how well this art form of filmmaking that we as humans invented can be used to capture the communal experience of humanity, of how we deal with our experience of this on this earth, and serve as a sort of extension of our communal memory. It's hard for me to describe. This is not a general true crime. It's not doing the regular, here's the thing that happened and this happened. This is very much about the people, and in the sense about all of us, about appreciating each other, even or maybe even especially when we're gone, and how tragedy is not the end of things, no matter how difficult it is to go through it. All of these things. And it's all packaged in a really, really. It feels a bit weird to talk about that aspect of filmmaking, but it's all packaged in a really, really well made, snappily edited film. Uh, really using this art form for something that I believe is a bit more profound than your regular entertainment piece or informational documentary. It is genuinely a creation of passion, of humanity, and the whole subject of this director already having this childhood friendship and history of making films with the unfortunate subject is such a nice cherry on top for this movie to exist as a true visual memento again, following into the footsteps of what they have done together when he was still alive. It's just a genuinely beautiful film. It's depressing, it's dire, it's really, really sad, but it is also incredibly beautiful and empowering, I believe. That's what I get out of this film. Even on a second watch, it still hit me in all of these ways. But yeah, that's my beginning ramble about this. I'm really, really curious how you felt about this.
Well, I mean, yeah, to go straight into spoiler territory as well.
Yeah.
My favorite two parts of this documentary, just to go there straight off the bat, that the whole time it's this guy Andrew's friend who is trying to make a film about his dead friend for his friend's son.
Yeah.
For when he grows up and tell him all about him and all the people who loved him and all that kind of shit. And then there's a bit towards the end after he's talked to everybody, met loads and loads of people who knew him and all this kind of stuff, or the family, that kind of thing. And they turn it back on him as the filmmaker. And it becomes, see, it kind of chokes me up talking about it. But it becomes about his relationship with his friend, even after all the stories that he's told about everyone else. And I don't think it really sunk in for me until then that, hey, the guy making the film is probably like his best, closest, oldest friend.
Yeah. Mm.
And, he probably has a lot to say or contribute. And then the next really touching bit, which will probably choke me up some more, is at the end when he changes the entire tone of the documentary, where it's meant he's making this story for Zachary, who's the kid and all that, but after Zachary gets murdered, and this is real murder as well, this isn't, this is a real life case. I just have to stress that, even though it might be obvious. And it turns into basically a story for his parents, for Andrew's parents, like the grandparents of the young child or the parents of the son who got killed initially. And there's a great part where he kind of shifts it from being directed at the grandchild to being directed at the grandparents. And so it cuts through everyone he's interviewed who has said all these wonderful words about Andrew or about his son Zachary or any of that kind of thing. And they use the same words essentially to talk about his parents, who are the ones who are still alive and still fighting for justice and all this kind of stuff. And that just killed me, man. Fucking hell. Talk about a touching emotional journey, like shit.
Yeah.
Like that just like wrecked me. Because of course the rest is sad. It's horrible. People getting murdered, people with lots of issues to deal with, all this kind of stuff. Families and friends who are by all accounts just decent, nice people, having to suffer such horrible tragedies and all this kind of stuff, and putting in so much effort to try and make things right or, do what they can. And it's just, those two parts for me were just, because they were so surprising, I think, as well, because I was just along for the ride. I didn't know anything about the story. I'm just watching it going, oh yeah, cool, I'll go with it kind of thing. You'd already told me that it was pretty sad and upsetting, and so I was kind of ready for that. And, that's cool. I don't mind having a good cry during a movie or a sad story, which really tugs on my heartstrings. But yeah, those bits at the end, I was just like, took it over the top kind of thing, where it went from being an interesting and very sad story to that change of what you were talking about, more about community and friends and people and humanity and all that kind of stuff, and how it's more about it ends up being kind of that sense of community gathering around each other when we need them and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And there's some great lines at the end from some of the people that they interviewed, because now these parents who are, elderly people and trying to change the laws and everything around the case that made the whole murder possible.
Yeah.
Because there was some mishandling of justice and all that kind of thing along the way. To me, that's almost the least interesting part.
Yeah.
Like the actual nuts and bolts of it. But it's really beautiful. They're like, oh, your son was murdered, but you've got so many children, because
Yes.
every single person
That
like, in the
phrasing.
doco is like part of their family. And yeah, just so beautiful. And it, you might think it's a bit cheesy or whatever, but it's like, if it was written in a dramatic film, it might be a bit cheesy.
Yeah.
But it's real people talking about their own genuine feelings. So it becomes just, really touching and really beautiful. And yeah, very, very cool. And that's where I think we talked about during the documentary episode, how the thing I like about documentaries is that even though they're true stories, they're a real good example of how to tell stories. And part of what I love about anything is the actual craft of storytelling. Like, it's why I like playing video games, why I like reading books, whatever, not necessarily because of the medium themselves, but because they're all different ways of telling stories. And I love the idea of telling stories and what that means and what that can do for people and, everything that comes along with that. And documentaries to me are very much a different style of storytelling, obviously, to like a dramatic film, because you're dealing with real life stuff. And like the worst documentaries are the ones where it just kind of, you might as well be reading a report of something that happened in a very objective and factual way, where it's just, this happened and this happened and at this time that happened and then at this time that happened. And there's a bit of that in this because that's exactly what did happen, but not in a bad way, because there's a lot of storytelling involved as well. And it's like, I think the thing I liked about this on a true crime kind of perspective was it didn't shy away from being very biased. And
Right.
you might think that's a weird thing to say, but it kind of makes sense in this film. Like you described, what's her name? Shirley, whatever. The murderer, ex-girlfriend.
Shirley Turner, yeah.
That's the one. You described her as a convicted felon or convicted murderer. But I don't know if she was convicted. I think she was found guilty, or she was in the process of about to be found guilty.
Yeah.
And that's when she ran away from America and moved to Canada. And that was part of the problem with the whole legislative process, was that she never got extradited back to America or anything to kind of face charges. So even though she had been to prison as well for other things, for that particular crime, I don't think she ever got actually put in jail for it or found quote unquote guilty until maybe after the fact. But not that I'm trying to bicker with you on that. But the interesting thing about that, I think, is that there's still that question mark, however slim it might be, that all the evidence obviously points to go. But, the documentary didn't try to be, because a lot of documentaries kind of, I think, let themselves down by trying to be too gray area fair. Like, it'd be better if they took a stance on something basically and tried to make a point instead of going, well, this happened, but maybe this happened and we don't know. Unless they genuinely don't know,
Yeah.
Like in the Jean Bonnet one, like,
Right.
who the fuck knows? I like that in this one, it was very much, no, she fucking did it, and there was no question about it. And they allowed the grandparents and the parents to be pissed off. And there's some really good interviews with them where they're saying, like, again, spoiler territory, of course, but the father of Andrew who died, he's saying, well, fuck. He sat at home thinking about how he could go to her house and murder her and get away with it. Or even if he did get caught, he'd go to prison. But then that's okay because his wife would be able to bring up the grandchild and look after him and all that kind of thing. And I'm just like, fuck, man.
They were ready to make sacrifices. Yeah. They were ready to throw it away.
And they did make so many sacrifices too. Like,
yeah.
Like, I love how the message in the end is basically what an amazing couple of people these, parents are. Because, fuck, man, they went above and beyond. Like, they went further than you would imagine for anything. Like, more than you would expect. You wouldn't blame them for, giving up or doing less. And a lot of people would, I imagine, which isn't a bad thing in their case. But, man, these people were determined and, so passionate, I guess, about doing the right thing, essentially. And maybe having a child be murdered in your lifetime kind of gives you that motivation. Like, I'm not in that position, so I don't know, thankfully. I don't necessarily want to know. But I imagine that's such a horrific thing that it probably motivates you to do something or not in your life and perhaps look at your life a bit differently. So, in that sense, I liked that it kind of, it's being made by the dude's best friend as well. So, but at no point he kind of gives any kind of amount of rope. Like, he's just always pushing the narrative of this is what happened. She's responsible for everything. The justice system has failed us as far as taking care of her as a obvious murderer, and so on and so forth. And so with all that in mind, and with the, like you say, you mentioned like the editing and stuff as well, and the kind of snappy cuts and all this kind of stuff, I really enjoyed that part of it as well, because to me that's part of like the storytelling, that's the pacing and the intent and the tone and all that kind of stuff. And to that end, I really enjoyed that side of it. I thought that was really clever, and kind of put it apart from other documentaries as well, because it wasn't as formulaic as a lot of documentaries can be, which, again, I like, and that's the sign of a good doco in my mind. But, yeah, kind of like with, Chasing Amy and stuff as well that we watched, it starts off being about something, but then it ends up being a story about something else entirely. Well, not entirely, very adjacent, very close, but it changes its perspective along the way because you've learned so much along the way and you gain a new perspective. And then, like I say, like hits you with those twists and turns, and you kind of go, oh, that's what this is about. That's the point. I thought it was about solving this case, or like telling you about this horrific case.
Exactly.
But actually it's a story about everyone else around it and them and their lives and how they deal with it and, all that kind of stuff, which, is way more interesting than the facts of a case that you could probably just Google if you wanted to.
Yeah.
It stops it from being a Wikipedia page kind of thing. And it does make it more personal, and it does tell an actual story instead of just being a news report,
Yeah, that's what makes it become an actual piece of real life and not just a facts sheet. You've talked about, even a documentary has to build up a narrative to string along the viewer.
Yeah.
And I think, especially with true crime or whatever, building such a narrative can become across as something manipulative or, biased. But like you said, in this movie, a bias makes sense because this is again, not the Wikipedia fact sheet. This is somebody's personal representation of a relationship with somebody else, as well as the community being captured. In that sense, even though there is a narrative through this obviously very dramatic and emotional story, it never felt manipulative to me. It never felt disingenuous.
No.
It is very much coming from a true place of life. And I think that's I think I don't believe you see that much in this particular subgenre of documentaries. It's just one of those things that makes it so special.
Well, it's almost kind of like it's hard not to kind of compare it a bit to the casting of Jean-Benet.
Yeah.
Because it's another true crime doco that we've watched. But it suited the subject material, I think, the angle that they took with the narrative in this one. Because for Jean-Benet, it was good that it did kind of explore every angle, and we don't know who did it. Maybe this could have happened if it was the mother. Maybe this could have happened if it was the father. Blah, 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 blah. But then the way they delivered that with all the different actors and everything, with different perspectives and different theories and all this kind of stuff, kind of enhanced that narrative of we got no fucking idea. However, in this one, there is that narrative of we know exactly what happened. And the point is not to figure that out. The point is
to deal with it.
To deal with it, the people involved, that sort of thing, what kind of people they are, what, to tell the story of this person's life as well, to kind of honor them in that sense. But then also to give the kicker of the justice system and things that need to be changed and all that kind of thing. Because, it wasn't about figuring out the case in the way that the Jean-Benet one was. This was about the aftermath of it all, really. And making it count in a way, like, doing something to, make the point, deliver the story, and hopefully make some changes along the way. And for that, I thought it was great. Basically, I don't really have heaps to say about it beyond what I've already said.
I mean, maybe if we're getting close to the end, I mean, it did actually manage to change things from what I've read. I mean, they touch on it in the film itself, but even afterwards, especially in Newfoundland, where most of this took place, there was eventually a law change that was spawned through this attention that the case got partially through this movie. So even aside of this entirely emotional, artistic mumbo jumbo, there was actual factual results coming from this project in the real world. So there's a nice additional sprinkle to it all.
The main little thing that they were chasing, at least that they mentioned in the doco, was how Shirley, what's her name, got let out on bail a number of times, even though she was heavily suspected / practically convicted of premeditated first-degree murder.
Yes.
And she should never have, been left alone with her child, essentially, and all this kind of stuff. But towards the end as well, they revealed a couple more facts. Like, she had 8 restraining orders against her.
Right, yeah.
And, things like this, which are kind of like, well, these are all points against her when it comes to deciding whether to give someone bail or not, like, or whether they're a danger to the community.
Let alone let her take care of a child. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, obviously, so I guess the thing I like as well is sometimes when people talk about how, the government's failed me or, the justice system is corrupt or whatever, I kind of roll my eyes a little because it's a bit like, yeah, cool. We all hate the government. How about that? Well, who cares? Like,
right.
Sometimes people get a bit
dramatic.
Like drinking their own tea kind of thing. Whereas this, I felt, talked about those same sorts of things, like where the government failed them, where the system failed them, all that kind of thing, but presented enough sensible reason and evidence as to why that's true. And it's not just sensationalized for the sake of attention or anything, And so, it's a little thing, but it's like, cool. I'm glad they didn't make that misstep either, kind of thing, So,
It was heavy film, but fantastic one.
Yeah, very sad. I mean, anything that's like a true story like this, where such horrific things happened, is fucking sad and horrible. Regardless, like you could make me watch the most boringly made documentary about something horrible, and I'll still get upset and emotional and whatever because it's just fucking horrible. But but yeah, this was also a good doco, I thought. So yeah, it was interesting, and yeah, very good.
Now, now that we have talked about how I don't know, powerful and devastating this very emotional and personal product is, I guess it's time for us to put a cold hard number on it, as
Oh,
we
yeah.
usually do with these movies.
I mean, I'm going to be very, very positive about this one because I did really think it was great. So
Yeah.
I think I'd land on a 4.5 out of 5,
Mhm.
9 out of 10. Like,
That
there were,
that is
yeah.
sorry.
No, go on.
A 4.5 out of 5 is exactly where I stood when I saw it the first time. But I think after seeing it twice and still being so emotionally affected, despite knowing exactly what I'm getting and where the story leads, I think I just have to raise that number to a full 10 out of 10. I can't really see any
Damn,
reason not to. It's
the
a
rare Matt,
fantastic
10 out of 10.
creation. Yeah. There
I
you
mean, to
go.
be fair, I was tossing up between 10 out of 10 or
Yeah.
9 because I forget why I ended up holding back a little, but I think there were just a couple of bits in it where I was like, that could have been better. But not enough to
Right.
care about or remember, but enough to kind of go, yeah, it's not perfect. But,
Yeah.
but that's okay. So that's all right. It's like a technical hiccup here and there or whatever that is more of a preference thing than anything else. But
Yeah.
ultimately, especially with that, especially with the shaping of the narrative, especially how it takes you on that journey, and then to the end, it kind of does that double switch around where it switches it to a story about him actually making the doco and his feelings as like a good friend, and then it turns it around again about it being about the parents and everyone
Yeah.
rallying behind them, and yeah, it's just very cool. So yeah,
It is very cool. Yeah, there we go. Dear Zachary, very
horrific,
cool.
but a good documentary.
Yeah.
Which is probably the best combination, I guess. If you're
Yeah,
going to talk
yeah.
about horrific subject matter, at least do it well.
Right. Absolutely, yeah. And that did nailed. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. We made it through the brutal one.
Yeah.
Guess we
So
we
in a way, I'm
going
kind of
ahead. Yeah.
glad that I brought what I did.
Yeah.
And I'm very kind of
Same.
interested to hear what you thought about it. So I brought the movie Paperman from 2009. Just snuck it a year out from Matt's. So this is a film directed and written by Kieran and Michelle Mulroney, who I don't really know very much other than this film. It's starring Jeff Daniels, Emma Stone, Ryan Reynolds, Lisa Kudrow, Kieran Culkin, and Hunter Parrish, and the rest are kind of whatever. I mean, I don't mean that disrespectfully. They're the main speaking roles. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And this is another film where I think it is about loss. It does fit the brief, I think, but it also has a bit of a comedy aspect to it. It's a very light-hearted kind of take on these sorts of things, while still, I think, telling a interesting story for my money anyway, and having an interesting perspective on loss, because it kind of looks at loss from a couple of different ways in the same story. But the basic plot is that Jeff Daniels is a writer who is married to Lisa Kudrow. He's middle-aged-ish, I guess, like in his 30s or 40s. I can't really place him because I'm terrible at that sort of thing. But he has basically taken some time out to go away to a holiday house to start writing or finish writing or write his next novel that he's been trying to work on. And his wife, Lisa Kudrow, kind of leaves him there and comes and visits him every now and then. And, they've got kind of an interesting relationship, I think, because it's kind of tested at times because he's a bit childish and a bit creative and a bit whimsical and, a bit more of a risk taker, whereas she's kind of presented as like the straight working woman who is an adult and does adult things and understands adult life, whereas Jeff Daniels' character is kind of still dealing with all that sort of shit. In the meantime, Emma Stone is just a local kid in this kind of small town where he's staying that he meets, and I forget how, but he basically he kind of like runs into her and kind of likes the cut of her jib or something, and hires her to babysit for him, even though he doesn't have a baby. And so she comes over to babysit, and she's like the alternate kid who's a bit weird and wonderful. Matt's shaking his head thoroughly at the moment. And, you know, so on and so forth, blah, blah, blah. They have a bit of an interesting relationship, and the film is kind of about their relationship with each other as well as with themselves, because Jeff Daniels has a imaginary friend played by Ryan Reynolds called Paperman, who is basically a dude in a space superhero outfit who like follows him around and like talks to him all the time and encourages him for things, or, you know, will speak on his behalf or whatever. Kind of a bit of a foil to his own emotional inadequacies and that sort of thing, and insecurities. Meanwhile, Emma Stone also has her own demons to deal with, which, again, spoilers, but she's accompanied by her dead friend who she hasn't quite gotten over. / brother, maybe? I can't remember. Were they related, or were they just...
That's some questions that I was going to raise for you, because I am not... But I guess we'll talk about that.
Yeah. So Kieran Culkin plays her imaginary friend, but her imaginary friend is actually the remnants of either a brother or a friend, I can't remember, who killed themselves, or maybe Matt's kind of screwing up his face again, but it's left a little bit ambiguous, I think, is the point. But I think either way, he's dead and means a lot to her, and kind of is not like haunting her like a ghost, but kind of she can't get rid of the memory of him or the existence of him out of her life. And she's got Hunter Parrish as her boyfriend, who's just like the douchey fuckwit boyfriend who is an idiot, you know, and that kind of covers the cast. But so throughout, basically, Jeff Daniels is this middle-aged man having this friendship with this teenager who's a bit kind of, you know, a bit of an outcast anyway. They kind of find common ground and like end up learning from each other, because she's actually quite mature and he's actually quite immature. And so they kind of meet somewhere in the middle. And it's not, I like that it's not anything that's kind of, you know, sexualized or anything like that. There's a bit of suspicion around that from other people, but I like how the writing doesn't take that and go there. Similarly, I like how Jeff Daniels is going through this whole kind of, you know, midlife crisis or whatever the fuck, and learning about himself and coming into his own and all that kind of thing, and learning how to let go of his old insecurities and all that sort of stuff. And so it's very trying for his wife, played by Lisa Kudrow, because he is quite immature and he does all this weird shit that she's like, oh, that's weird, I don't know what's happening, and really stresses her out. But I love that their relationship, although tested, doesn't just fall apart at the first sign of trouble. Like, they do kind of persevere, and they do, you know, learn about each other along the way as well. And I think it strengthens their relationship going through this kind of weird time where he's trying to figure himself out and try lots of different things. And, you know, all the way around this, he's trying to write this book, but having a real trouble. And he only kind of has success when he figures himself out and all that kind of stuff. So that's the basic plot anyway, in a rambly kind of format. But the reason I like this film, and the reason that I wanted to see what Matt thought, and I'll just preempt it by saying I could very much see anyone watching this film not digging it.
Okay.
Because it is a bit offbeat, I think, and a bit unexpected in a way. And you kind of have to... It's one of those films where if you watched it was a certain way, you might not even think about the kind of things that I think about when I watch it. And because when I watch it, I think about Jeff Daniels' character, and especially his relationship with his imaginary friend. And it's very much about, you know, growing up, and it's very much about self-confidence and self-efficacy and letting go of a part of yourself that you're afraid to let go of, because you feel like that would be moving on and cutting off part of your life. And maybe because I'm a bit older, maybe whatever, I can kind of relate to that. And time has a different meaning the older you get and all that kind of thing. So this kind of speaks to me in a way that's like, it's very much about loss, but while it mourns it in one way, it also celebrates it in another, because losing certain aspects can allow you to move forward as much as you can grieve losing it and leaving it behind. So I think, to me, that's the kind of the point of this movie and the story, is that you have to move on and leave things behind if you are going to move forward. Otherwise, you're just kind of stuck and you're never going to change. And I think for both Jeff Daniels and Emma Stone, that's kind of a big part of their journey in this film. So, yeah, I don't know if that made sense. That's just me rambling about it. But I'm going to shut up for a second. What do you reckon, Matt? What'd you take on this?
Yeah, well, I had a pretty troubling, unsure time with this one. To start off, I do believe the individual character problems, the individual personalities of these two main characters was interesting. It was a kind of nice, yeah, like I think you pretty much already said it at some point. It's a nice clash of different points of maybe refusing to grow up or whatever. And nice mixing of these two, their very different personalities at very different stages of their coming of age journey or whatever you want to call it. There was one moment that I thought perfectly kind of encapsulated what these characters were supposed to be. I think it's her, Emma Stone's character, asking him, would you rather walk backwards for the entirety of your life or step your toe on every step? And he said, he says he doesn't deal well with pain, so he would rather walk backwards without seeing where he's going. And she says she likes to know where she is going. And that pretty much, for me, it was like a perfect like visual representation of him, who's kind of like isolating himself and refusing to grow, or like as a safety mechanism, refusing to grow as an adult person or whatever, kind of like avoiding conflict or whatever, that sort of thing. While she was more on the self-punishment grind. It really felt like she was, especially with her borderline abusive boyfriend or whatever, who did not appreciate her at all. It was kind of like she wants to have a place in her world, even if that means going through some shit. Maybe she even thought she deserved it for reasons in her past or whatever. And yeah, there are these two frameworks for personality which could serve well for some exploration. But the whole film kind of felt to me like the puzzle pieces were there, but they never really locked together. It all felt a bit woozy.
What does that mean?
Yeah, I'm trying to phrase it in a way that makes sense. Both, I mean, like, especially the main character, Jeff Daniels' character, is very much a quirky little dude, very much not acting his age or whatever you want to call it, that, which is fine. And I also kind of like that it is not like, we're not pathologizing these people. They are just weird, because people can just be weird. That's fine. We don't need to have a concrete explanations why somebody acts in a way that we wouldn't expect. But I do have a feeling a lot of the character actions that move the story forward felt hard to understand for me. Like the entire, you talked about, you didn't quite remember how they first met at the beginning. And that's like obviously the starting point for this entire story. And even that one felt really strange and weak to me, because he just starts stalking her on the street for no reason. And then they talk, and he hires her as a babysitter. It just felt so out of nowhere and nonsensical to me. It felt really forced. I think that's the thing. A lot of these character actions that drive the story forward felt forced and not reasonable in the
Really?
concept, in the context of the story. To me, at least. To me, at least.
Well, because to me that's like, and not to cut you off completely, but like,
Yeah.
it's part of that his character. Like he's drawn to the whimsy and the romantic ideal of things, as
I guess
opposed
so.
to, you know, the practicalities and the risk assessment kind of thing. You know, like, and I don't know. Maybe I can just relate to that a little because, you know, you might have that kind of experience where you kind of see some random person and you just make up this romanticized, not necessarily intimately, but this romanticized version of who they are and what they're about and all that kind of thing. And you've never met them before. So they end up fascinating you in a way that is probably unreasonable and, you know, weird, but
Yeah.
part of that
I
kind
do
of character, I
believe
guess.
I do believe there's a sort of style of character writing where the audience has to be just naturally on the same wavelength to make it hit or something like that. So I kind of get why this is good enough for others, but for me, it kind of didn't work as a strong jumping off point. And again, stuff like this kind of led through the entire story. Uh, the same way with let's actually talk about these imaginary friends because I had big questions about these. So
Right.
he has the comic book superhero type,
Yeah.
which makes complete sense to me. I get where they are coming from. He was a child, he had a superhero imaginary friend, and he stuck around for too long because he didn't grow up or whatever.
Yeah.
Makes complete sense. Her imaginary friend counterpart is some guy. You had the theory that it might have been a dead friend, but the person that died in her past
Yeah, I
was
remember
actually
now.
her sister.
Yeah.
So, and see, that would have made sense for me as well if her imaginary friend was her dad's sister, but they didn't go for that. They invented a guy that didn't exist before. It's not a representation of
Yeah, no,
somebody
that's right.
she knew before. It's just a guy that apparently is very much romantically inclined. uh, and keeps telling her to not hang around with these douchebags and whatever. But I don't I don't understand where they were going with this guy.
Well, I think
What
it's more
why
a representation of her, like how it's her representation of her feeling as being kind of stuck in this town where her sister, her only closest ally slash family member, whatever friend, she's feeling the loss of that. So she's kind of manifested this not so much boyfriend character, but this character who is totally obsessed with her and will do anything for her and will love her and support her unconditionally no matter what she does, kind of thing. And no matter what happens and no matter what happens to her by other people, this her imaginary friend kind of will always be there to love her. And I think there's a bit where I'm trying to remember, but I can't remember exactly. But kind of the
Mhm.
moment where she kind of lets him go and loses him is what?
No, go on.
I don't know. Well, the way I remember it is that she kind of says something about, you know, she doesn't need external kind of validation in that sense. Not in those words, but that's the impression that I get from it. Where she's and it's kind of similar to Jeff Daniels' character losing his imaginary friend. Both characters kind of stop requiring an external stimulus to kind of support them, and they are able to stand on their own 2 feet and make their own decisions and do their own thing. And that's kind of what the story is about. It's like you talk about the stubbing the toe or walking backwards thing,
Yeah.
and like, yeah, it's a very obvious kind of analogy to their personalities because yeah, uh, Jeff Daniels' character, I think his name's Richard, would rather walk backwards, not knowing where he's going, because at least he knows it's safe or safer
Yeah.
than
Mhm.
walking forwards, constantly stubbing your toe. So he's much more of a risk averse kind of person in that sense, and his fears kind of rule him more than anything else, and his insecurities and his regrets about the past and all that kind of thing. Whereas her character is much more, I'm just going to run ahead and get away from whatever the fuck is, holding me down or hurting me or making me afraid or whatever. Even if it's painful, even if it's, not the best choice, even if it is risky, I'm just going to fucking barrel ahead because I want to get away from everything that I don't like, essentially. And that kind of sums both their characters up quite well, I think. So in that sense, I think that's actually quite a good representation of their imaginary friends as well. Because while she's trying to run away from everything, her imaginary friend is kind of like, stay with me and you'll be safe and you'll be loved and you'll be cared for and considered and all this stuff that you're trying to run to and not necessarily run away from. And that's a result of, her sister dying and obviously her family not supporting her so well or whatever, or just kind of sort out her own teen bullshit. Much like Jeff Daniels' character, his superhero imaginary friend is kind of like, yeah, let's go. Let's do it. Nothing is impossible. Let's just jump up and get on and get going. Because that's everything that he wishes he was in a way, like, because he's so risk averse and he's so conservative in that sense about taking a step forward. So his friend is like always the one encouraging him forward. And so for them to then get to a point where they can do without those characters, kind of, to me, that is a result of their character growth throughout the film. And, which is obviously spurred on by perhaps their relationship with each other and getting to know different perspectives and that sort of stuff. So, because they kind of challenge each other a little bit as well. But also support each other in ways that other people don't. So,
right.
Yeah.
I think I was missing the balance there because his imaginary friend is so clear, straightforward, and her was kind of trying to do more than that. I mean, I'm assuming they made her imaginary friend a guy who seemingly is in love with her to have a twist as it is revealed later in the story that it is an imaginary friend, because it's not quite clear from the start. I kind of get that, but I feel like that kind of overcomplicated things for no proper reason, that sort of thing. I don't think that was a good decision. And the way that they get rid of those two as well, I kind of get your argument, but I was confused because he straight up tells his imaginary friend, all right, I'm moving on. I don't need you anymore. Thanks for everything. Goodbye. Made sense. It was a decision. And it was a point of growth. Her, on the other hand, you said there probably was a moment where she said something like that to her imaginary friend. I don't quite remember that. I do remember her walking into a room and her imaginary friend hanging from the ceiling on a noose in a sort of suicide way. And
that's kind of it, isn't
it? That's kind of what?
Well, like, you got to imagine that's all happening in her mind. So that's all her creation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so even though she doesn't say the words, I don't need you anymore, for him to kill himself, it's her decision, whether it's subconscious or not. It's not like this thing is beyond her control. Like, this is her own manifestation. And for him to then basically kill himself and leave her alone, I think, to me, that's her grieving for the loss of this support. As in, it's not just, see you later, I'm good. It's like, no, I'm going to miss you. It's going to be difficult without you, but I'm ready to kind of take that step.
Damn.
As opposed to Jeff Daniels, who's like, I'm a big boy now. I'm an adult. I choose to get rid of you. I don't need you anymore. I'm going to do this on my own. Peace out. Which is, if you think about it, both of those decisions are kind of in contrast to their own characters, which again shows their growth.
Right. Yeah.
In my mind, anyway.
It felt weird to me because the one made a conscious decision and the other one was presented so dramatically and more negatively in my eyes than positively, especially considering that in her past, the traumatic experience was a failed double suicide where she survived and her sister died. So there was a suicide that was a key moment messing her up or whatever. And then her imaginary friend is also a suicide, but that's supposed to be a sort
don't you think
of
that's
point
like
of moving forward.
so
I
perfect for their
kinda-
characters? Like,
I
as in,
th-
yeah, she's always so decisive and she's always so, running ahead and taking risks. And, if you think about that, stubbing her toe. And so for her to kind of accept the fact that she's on her own, and so she has to kind of stop for a second and take responsibility for what she's doing and make that decision. And so that is kind of a tragedy for her to go through. However, like Jeff Daniels, he's always he would probably have initially loved it if Paper Man just kind of disappeared on his own and he didn't have to take part in it. Like, because then he's not having to make the decision and be responsible for it. But him to actually make the decision and take responsibility again is him kind of growing up and being like, I can do this. I don't need this anymore.
Yeah, I think it's just I can see the idea. I think, but I don't see it come together. That's what I mean. That's my experience, kind of, with the whole thing. I see the foundations of ideas that are not bad and could totally work, but I don't see the puzzle pieces come together. I don't know. That was my experience of this. I didn't think this was terrible or whatever. I just didn't see it come together all that well. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I do enjoy, and the thing I liked about this film that I do like about other films, again, going back to storytelling in general, I love this idea of using, basically using fiction, using fantasy or made up shit, like not factual documentaries or whatever, to tell stories of how people do emotionally deal with things and to kind of represent emotional journeys and that sort of stuff. I love it when it's fantastical or, not literal, and there are representations and symbolism and all that kind of thing, and, allegory and all that kind of stuff. And so I think, again, that's why this kind of speaks to me, because it's about these people dealing with loss through their own kind of weird and wonderful way. And it being perhaps a bit strange or a bit outsider, but to me, that's appealing. That's interesting. That's like,
I get that.
When we're dealing with these kind of emotions and we're having to navigate these emotional kind of traumatic almost pathways, what do we invent to help our brains cope with that shit, essentially? Because we all do that. Like we self-talk, it's the middle of the night and you're scared of the dark, but you tell yourself there's no such thing as monsters. It's all good, like all that kind of shit, like you have a nightmare and you wake up and you feel scared, but you go, no, it was just a nightmare. It's okay. Don't worry. And then you go back to bed, kind of thing. We always kind of reassure ourselves to cope with how we're feeling. So when it is something that's like meaningful and existential and, very personal, those different ways that people deal with it, I think, is the most fascinating thing in the world. Because to me anyway, I think that level of, and that kind of artistry of telling stories about emotional realities is fascinating to me and something I am always drawn to. So yeah, maybe that's why it kind of hit more for me or not. I don't know, but that's kind of where I come at it from.
Yeah, I mean, I totally see where you're coming from. One more note though, before I forget about it. You did say in your summary that his imaginary Superman friend is called Paperman. It's not actually true. That character's name is Captain Excellence.
That's right.
Paperman is just Paperman was also very weak name in my eyes.
Again, like I mentioned before we started recording that I haven't actually watched this since just before our last episode.
Yeah, no.
So my memory of things might be a bit sketchy because I'm not very detail oriented in that sense.
Yeah. But the Paperman is the title because that's one of the titles for his upcoming book, the character's upcoming book.
Basically, yeah, he's writing this book about this bird, which is kind of like an extinct, lonely bullshit bird that no one cares about, and it's not even like beautiful or anything. There's no real reason to be interested in this bird. And as he interviews people about it as well, they're kind of a bit like, what, who cares? It's just some stupid fucking bird that can't procreate, or there's some reason about it that it died out because of its own stupidity kind of thing, rather than being hunted to death or something like that. But that's part of his existential thing that he's trying to deal with, because at the very end, there's this big kind of conversation between him and Lisa Kudrow about whether they were going to have kids and all this kind of stuff, and how he's so afraid of being a parent and because he's still figuring himself out and all that kind of thing. And he kind of blames her for it, but then realizes that he's the one who didn't want to have kids in the first place. And, you know, as much as I'm not a parent and I don't relate to that personally, I do kind of get that whole existential conundrum of realizing that you are just one little person in this big fuck off universe, and there's nothing that makes you special, and there's nothing that, you know, makes you memorable or anything like that. And I think the way we combat that as human beings is we have people who do love us and do care for us and all that kind of thing. And one of my favorite quotes from just life is Keanu Reeves, who was on like The Tonight Show or something, and he got interviewed about basically the fact that he's Buddhist and all this kind of stuff. And so they asked him, what do you think happens when you die? And his answer was beautiful, because all he said was, the people who love us will miss us.
Right.
And that was his answer for what happens when you die. And I think that's perfect, because it is just, that's it, really. Like, I don't believe in any kind of higher power or whatever. And, you know, ultimately that is kind of what will happen. No one gives a fuck about you really in 100 years. Maybe you invent something, that's cool, but they give a fuck about that. They don't care about you personally. And that's okay though. That's life. And that's part of living. But you know, that makes it hard for people to deal with the fact that maybe they are not going to have any kids. Maybe they are the last of their family, you know, lineage or something. And that does fuck with people's heads. And it gives you that kind of existential drama, I suppose, about your place in the world and all that kind of thing. And I feel like that kind of was embodied quite well with Jeff Daniels and the book he's writing as well, where he's trying to write this amazing book, but it's actually a bit of a bullshit book. And, you know, this whole idea about the weird bird kind of doesn't hold any water. And it's like a really try-hard attempt to be memorable.
I like the bird.
But that's kind of the point, you know. Anyway, any final thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I don't know, man. No.
I mean, I will point out, though, you're not alone. Like,
yeah,
Rotten Tomatoes critics rating for this is 33%.
yeah.
So I get that this ain't everybody's cup of tea. But that's kind of half the reason I wanted to see what you thought anyway. So,
Yeah,
because I genuinely mean everything I say about this film. Like, I'm not bullshitting. I do think it's brilliant. But I get that that is obviously not the case for everybody. So, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's not the content that's the problem, it's the execution for me. I don't know, I could see a better story about these characters. But yeah.
Fair enough. What would you rate it?
My professional numerical rating encompassing this complex product would probably hinge around the 5 out of 10 mark. The worst rating of all time, the mediocre middle ground. It hurts a bit to do that,
Don't
but
care rating.
unfortunately, that is where I stand with this film. I didn't hate it. I didn't like it much. And so I have to be on the neutral middle ground with this one. How about you?
Easy, like, not like a 10 out of 10, but a 4 out of 5 and 8 out of 10.
Dang.
To me, like a solid, good fucking movie. And kind of up my alley as well. Like, again, I know a lot of it's personal preference or whatever. That's why we call the podcast Subjectively Correct.
Right.
Because I know I'm correct, no matter what. But this is the kind of movie that speaks to me. For anyone playing along as well, one of the other movies I considered for Loss, and I think might have done better with you in the long run, so I suggest you watch it, or anyone listening watches it anyway, is a movie called I Killed Giants. Don't know if I spoke about it on last episode or if we just spoke about it afterwards.
Yeah, I think after.
But again, it's another story about a kid this time dealing with trauma through constructing a fantasy world and reason behind the trauma as opposed to the real life hard fact of the trauma. Very cool film, very cool visual novel that it's based on, or comic, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. Very worth checking out. Go watch it. The film's actually really good adaptation of the book. They read the book first and then watched the film, and they're both great. So I would recommend those wholeheartedly.
The graphic novel is on my to read right now. I am curious about that one first. Yeah.
Well, if you live nearby, I'd lend it to you.
Sure.
But I ain't sending it to Germany.
Yeah, no.
Cool. Well, let's move on and put those to bed. I think the thing I liked about these two films, regardless of whether you liked Paperman or not, was that they kind of took completely different tones and perspectives on the theme of loss. So there's a good kind of variety of interpretations there, I think.
I agree.
So,
and we didn't have too much crying in this episode.
No. I mean, to be fair, Paperman does make me cry because it's very touching, I think. But I understand if other people don't cry, whatever. But Dear Zachary is like, the reality of it is what hits you, I think.
Yeah.
Because it's a doco, because it's true, it's very easy to empathize with these people who are very emotionally invested.
Yeah. I know if I rewatch Dear Zachary another time and somehow make it without shedding a tear, I know I lost my humanity. That's my test for that.
Well, and fair enough too. Yeah, there's a couple of movies where I know if I'm gonna watch it, I'm gonna be bawling my eyes out.
Yeah.
And if I don't, then what the fuck is going on?
Exactly. Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Matt, what are we looking at next time?
So next time we pulled the theme. You couldn't make this nowadays. Could be interpreted in a couple of ways. So I'm very, very curious what sort of films we are gonna collect here. I can start with mine. My thought process, or what I landed on for my different choices, was mostly either something where the humor would probably not necessarily hold up to today's sensibilities or whatever you want to call it. It's either going to be something like that or something that is so edgy that you would be hard pressed to find somebody to produce it nowadays. And I think I land
Before
on the.
we get into that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt. I'd like to just say for the record, I don't think there is any film that you couldn't make today. I know a lot of people like to say, oh, the PC police are too hardcore and you'd never be allowed to get away with that. I think you could. Like, I do think you could get away with anything if you did make it in the right way. But, yeah. So with that, there's a bit of artistic license, I think, in this interpretation of what we choose.
Yeah,
anyway,
that's the thing, though, again, about the interpretation. There isn't any movie. I agree with you. There's no movie you couldn't make today when it comes to sensibilities or whatever. But, you know, I was trying to think of something, maybe a movie that was made filmed in a location that doesn't exist anymore. That's not accessible anymore. Something like that.
That'd be interesting.
That sort of interpretation is still valid. But again, that's not the route I went down with my ultimate choice. My pick is one that is nasty, gnarly, disgusting, fringe, edgy media. You're probably gonna hate it, and I'm excited for that. But it is something that I would probably never again have another chance to talk about with anybody in my life. And it is called something.
It has a name.
It definitely has a name. It is called Men Behind the Sun from 1988, a Chinese historical
Never heard of it.
flick. And I will
I
not
like a bit
go
of Chinese historical.
And I will not go further into why I picked it for this one, why I think this quote unquote couldn't be made today. I will reveal that in the episode.
Sure. I mean, I will do the same, as in, I'm not going to talk about it now. The one that I've picked, if anyone has seen it, you'll know immediately why I've picked it.
Oh, God.
Because, it's not an unknown, it's a very famous film, actually. But before I get into that, talking about different interpretations of this topic, one film that I would have brought if you hadn't seen it, because I love it, but I know you have seen it and you gave it like 3 stars or something, that's cool, whatever, is Saint Elmo's Fire.
Oh,
Which
interesting.
in my view is the best Brat Pack film of the 80s. And I love it to death.
Huh.
And it's very nostalgic. But the reason that couldn't be made today is not because of anything in it, but it's just so 80s. It's so of its time.
Right, okay.
That you could not make it today. Even if you were trying to set it in the 80s, you wouldn't be able to make that film today. It's like The Lost Boys or other, classic films that are very set in their time.
Yeah.
And very influenced by their time. Yes, you could remake them. Yes, you could do all that, but you could never make that film again. I haven't gone that way with this film that I have chosen, but I would have picked St. Elmo's Fire if you hadn't seen it. Probably much to not your pleasure. Instead, I've picked the film Leon the Professional from 1994.
Yeah.
Yeah, great film. I'm not as hype about it as a lot of people are. I'll say that straight off the bat. Like, a lot of people go to bat for this film like there's no tomorrow.
Yeah,
and
for real.
Will say it's the best film ever made, and fuck me, it's the best thing ever, and it's so perfect.
Yeah.
It's very, very good. Don't get me wrong. I think it's brilliant, but it's not that good. Like, it's not a 10 for me. I'll say that off the bat, but it's fucking cool, and I don't think you could make it today.
Interesting. I never saw.
For reasons, yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious what exactly the reason might be. I have a hunch, but I'm not entirely sure.
I mean, yeah, it's not an unknown film, so
yeah,
sure, go for your life. But it's definitely worth a watch, I think, at the very least, and it's a very good film. So
yeah, it's been on my watch list.
But if it was made today, there'd be not just for anyone who knows the film, not just the obvious difference, but I think there'd be more than that. There'd be a few differences made and a few concessions made of this film. So yeah, anyway, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, gonna be a fun time. Well,
I didn't like your description of your one, Man Behind the Sun. It didn't fill me with confidence, put it that way.
Yeah, it's gonna be a rough one, I believe. Anyway, hell yeah. You survived the spiders, you're gonna survive this.
Oh, people getting fucked up doesn't bother me. But
we'll
bugs
see about
fucking
that,
people up.
homie. We'll see about that.
Oh, really? This is a challenge, is it?
Anyway.
All right.
That
I'll show you how unbothered I am next time.
Yeah. You might be crying for different reasons that time. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this episode of Subjectively Correct. Feel free to talk about your favorite Lost in the world.
Yeah.
Or films
this will be a fun discussion.
Or films that take the movie, take that theme into account.
Yeah.
Let us know how much you bawled your eyes out during Dear Zachary. And yeah, I don't know. That's it.
So I'm just eyeing Matt off, wondering what he's going to say about Paperman.
Let us know let us know about your imaginary friend that's still haunting you to this day, just like Paperman.
Anyway, let's end that there. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody.
Let's end this.
Peace out.
Goodbye.